There's a moment, quiet but powerful, when everything shifts, a moment when you stop running, stop reaching, and finally choose stillness over struggle. That's the moment they feel it, the energy, the absence. The space you once filled with effort, love, and pursuit, now empty, and in that emptiness a mirror is held up to them. That's when the missing begins, not because you tried harder, but because you finally stopped trying at all. The truth is, chasing doesn't create closeness. It creates pressure. The more you chase, the more they pull away, not always out of malice, but out of comfort. People don't value what they assume will always be there. And when you give someone the constant reassurance of your presence, without requiring effort in return, you unknowingly train them to take you for granted. But the moment you step back, everything changes. Not because of manipulation, but because of magnetism. Your absence becomes more powerful than your presence ever was when it was being ignored. When you stop chasing, something internal realigns. You begin to reclaim your energy. And not just your physical energy, but your emotional, mental, and spiritual power. Because whether you realized it or not, every time you chased, reached out first, tried to fix things, or stayed available for breadcrumbs, you were giving away little pieces of yourself. You weren't just texting or calling. You were energetically pouring yourself into someone who wasn't doing the same for you. And over time, that slow leak of energy leaves you drained, uncentered, and disconnected from your own worth. Letting go of the chase isn't weakness. It's the return to your strength. It's the moment you say, no more negotiating my value, no more exhausting myself for someone who doesn't meet me halfway. And that shift, that's when things begin to change, because the energy you were directing toward them now comes back to you. Suddenly you have space to think clearly, space to breathe, space to reflect on who you are outside of the story you are trying to maintain. You begin to pour that energy into things that light you up again, into passions you put on hold, into the friends you stopped calling, into the self-care rituals you forgot about. You begin to feel lighter, sharper, more focused. It's not about pretending you don't care, it's about actually remembering what it feels like to care about yourself again. Because when you were chasing, you were constantly placing your value in someone else's hands. Their replies determined your mood, their silence felt like punishment. Their attention felt like oxygen, but now you are learning to breathe on your own again, and here's what's wild. As you refocus your energy inward, they feel it. Even if you don't say a word, energy doesn't lie. People feel when they're no longer the center of your emotional universe. They feel when you're no longer waiting for a text, when you're no longer sending subtle signals. When you're no longer holding space for something one-sided, that pull they once took for granted disappears, and in its absence they're left with a new reality. You've stopped trying. This isn't about playing games. This isn't about reverse psychology or emotional manipulation. It's about truth, about self-respect, about knowing that your energy is currency and where you spend it matters. When you stop giving so freely to someone who doesn't show up for you, you stop signaling that your love can be earned without effort. You begin to teach them, without a single word, that if they want access to you, it will require presence, consistency, and real emotional availability. And that's when they start missing you, because your absence becomes more powerful than all your past efforts combined. When you pull your energy back, you create a vacuum, one that can only be filled if they rise to meet you. Not because you asked them to, but because you finally chose yourself. When you stop chasing, emotional clarity begins to emerge, like mist lifting after a long storm. While you were deep in pursuit, your vision was clouded. You were too close, too emotionally invested to see things for what they really were. Your heart wanted answers, your mind wanted hope, and both were loud enough to drown out the truth. But once you step back, when the calls and texts stop, when the mental what-ifs go quiet, you create the emotional space needed to see the situation clearly for the first time. This clarity isn't always immediate. At first, it might feel like a void. You're used to reacting to them, checking in, wondering what they're thinking. But in the silence of that space, you start to hear your own voice again, not the anxious voice that feared losing someone, but the true one, the one that says, I deserve to feel safe, I deserve to feel chosen, I deserve peace. And the more time you spend in that space, the clearer things become. You begin to recognize all the ways you were compromising. You realize how much effort you were putting in compared to what you were receiving. It's in this stillness that you also begin to recognize how one-sided the dynamic had become. When you're constantly the one reaching out, trying to keep the connection alive, it becomes hard to tell the difference between mutual interest and obligation. But when you stop, when you go quiet, that's when you find out who really wants to show up. That's when truth reveals itself, not in their words, but in their actions. Some people will fade, and that hurts, but it also frees you, because now you know, now you're not guessing. At the same time, your absence forces them into their own moment of clarity. When you stop filling in the blanks, when your energy disappears from their daily life, they have nothing left to lean on but their own feelings. You're no longer the distraction or the fallback plan. You're no longer available to soothe, to question, or to remind them of your presence. And in that silence, they finally start to reflect. Maybe for the first time, they begin to notice the gap. They begin to remember the way you made them feel. Not because you told them, but because you stopped telling them. Clarity is a gift, not just for you, but for them too. But it only comes when you're willing to step back, stop chasing, and allow reality to reveal itself. It's not easy. It takes courage to face what you didn't want to see. But once you do, you stop operating from fantasy and start living in truth. And from truth, you can make real choices, choices that honor who you are and what you actually deserve, not just what you hoped it could be. When you stop chasing, your value begins to rise, not because you changed who you are, but because you stopped giving yourself away so easily. When you're always available, always reaching, always giving without requiring effort in return, the other person begins to expect that energy without earning it. Over time, they grow used to the idea that your attention is guaranteed, your love is automatic, and your space is permanent. But when you remove yourself from that pattern, when you finally step back, they're forced to reevaluate. They start to see you through new eyes, and what once seemed familiar now feels rare. Human nature tends to overlook what's constant and overvalue what's scarce. And when you were always there, applying instantly, making time, checking in, keeping the connection alive, they had no urgency to truly appreciate what they were receiving. But the moment you stop chasing, you become less accessible. Not in a manipulative way, but in a respectful, self-honoring way. Your time, your love, your energy, they're no longer on discount. You've stopped handing out unlimited access to someone who hasn't shown you consistency. And in that shift, your value begins to speak for itself. Your energy starts to carry weight. Your absence becomes a presence. Suddenly, they're no longer able to assume you'll be there no matter what. They start to remember the things they overlooked, the way your voice grounded them, the comfort of your support, the stability of your care. What was once taken for granted is now noticed in its absence. Because now they have to feel what life is like without the parts of you they thought would always be there. And that feeling, it wakes them up. But more importantly, this isn't about being valued by them. It's about being valued by you. When you stop chasing, you send a message to yourself first. I'm no longer begging for love, I am love. That inner declaration begins to reshape your behavior, your energy, your boundaries. You stop tolerating half-effort. You stop explaining your worth. You no longer audition for someone to choose you. You choose yourself, and that inner shift makes you magnetic. People are drawn to energy that knows its worth. Not arrogance, but certainty, and when you show up with that certainty, grounded, centered, and unavailable for anything less than respect, they can feel it. They may not say it right away, but they begin to notice. And often it's in that noticing that their curiosity, their longing, their regret begins to build, not because you played a game, but because you stopped playing small. Your worth was never lost, it was just buried beneath all the chasing. And now that you've stopped, now that you've reclaimed it, they finally start to see you. But the real magic is, you saw yourself first. When you stop chasing, you no longer carry the emotional weight for two people. You allow the balance to return. Chasing creates a lopsided dynamic where you're the one initiating, maintaining, fixing, and over-delivering, while the other person becomes increasingly passive, often unaware of how much energy you're burning just to keep the connection alive. You start doing both your part and theirs, which isn't love, it's emotional labor. But the moment you stop chasing, you stop feeding that imbalance. You put the responsibility back where it belongs. This shift may feel uncomfortable at first. You're used to stepping in when the energy drops. You're used to interpreting silence as a signal that you must do more. You've trained yourself to keep the flow going even when it feels one-sided. But when you finally pause, when you don't send that message, don't reach out first, don't make the extra effort, you create a moment of truth. Now the question becomes, will they step up or will they step away? And that answer, whatever it is powerful, because now you're no longer guessing. You're no longer in a relationship dynamic where your self-worth is tied to how hard you hustle for love. You stop spinning your wheels, trying to be enough, trying to be seen. You realize that a connection worth having doesn't require you to prove your value over and over again. It's mutual, it's balanced, it flows both ways. This reset in energy also teaches the other person something important. When they've been used to you carrying it all, your pause feels like absence, but it's really presence. It's you showing up for yourself, and in doing so, you silently invite them to take responsibility for their role. Not out of revenge, but out of necessity. You've created a vacuum, and they'll either rise to fill it with effort, or you'll finally see that they were never truly invested. Either way, you get clarity, not confusion. Letting go of the imbalance doesn't mean giving up. It means choosing better. It means refusing to keep chasing someone who's not meeting you halfway. It means honoring yourself enough to say, I'm not carrying this alone anymore. And once you've done that, you free yourself. You give yourself space to receive the kind of connection where love is mutual, effort is shared, and you're not constantly trying to compensate for someone else's emotional absence. The right person will meet you where you are not only when you stop chasing, but because you stopped chasing. When you stop chasing and redirect your focus inward, something powerful happens. You become magnetic, not because you're trying to prove a point, not because you're playing hard to get, but because you've finally made yourself your top priority. The energy you once poured into someone else is now fueling your passions, your health, your growth, your joy. You start showing up differently in the world. Your posture shifts, your presence sharpens. You glow, not because someone is loving you, but because you've started deeply loving yourself. This kind of self-focus isn't selfish, it's sacred. You begin to make decisions not from a place of emotional desperation, but from clarity. You stop settling for maybe. You stop accepting effort that's inconsistent. You start choosing peace over chaos, progress over stagnation. The world around you can feel this shift, especially the person who once had your attention on a silver platter. They notice that your time is no longer freely available, that your energy isn't being broadcast to win them over. They feel the loss of being centered in your emotional orbit, and what happens next is often surprising. As you build momentum in your own life, whether it's through your work, your creativity, your friendships, or your spiritual growth, you become more attractive. There's a quiet confidence in someone who's no longer seeking validation. You become someone who radiates from within, someone who doesn't chase, but attracts, and people feel that, they lean in, especially the one who used to take your presence for granted. They begin to remember not just who you were, but who you're becoming, and it draws them in like gravity. What they're really missing is your energy, your nurturing, your attention, your consistency, but what they now realize is that those qualities weren't theirs by default. They were gifts, and gifts are not owed. When you stop chasing and start focusing on your own life, you're not withholding love, you're raising your standard, you're not punishing them, you're prioritizing yourself. And that recalibration of your energy creates space for them to feel your absence, reflect on your value, and if they're truly ready, return with greater intention. But whether they come back or not is no longer the point. The real victory is in how you've reconnected with yourself. You're not trying to be magnetic. You simply are. You're not chasing attention. You're living with intention. That's the shift. That's the power. And that's what makes them miss you, not because you vanished, but because you finally became visible to yourself. When you stop chasing, you reconnect with your authentic self, the version of you that existed long before the doubt, the fear, and the need to be chosen took over. You begin to remember the real you, the one who laughed freely, moved confidently, and believed that love should feel safe and mutual. That woman didn't wait for someone to pick her, she was the choice. And slowly but surely she returns, not because someone else affirmed her, but because you did. You invited her back the moment you stepped away from the noise of pursuit and into the quiet strength of self-respect. This return to self is not dramatic. It's powerful and it's calm. You're not seeking revenge or proving a point. You're simply honoring your truth. You stop showing up as a version of yourself shaped to keep someone else close. You no longer say yes when your heart says no. You don't dim your light to be less intimidating. You don't shrink to fit into a love that can't hold your full expression. You're done performing. You're done earning. You're done proving. You've remembered who you are. And that's the most magnetic thing of all. And here's what's ironic. The moment you reclaim your true self, that's the version of you they remember and miss the most. The version that was whole, glowing, centered, and deeply intuitive. That's the you they originally connected with, even if they didn't know how to handle it. That's the version they couldn't fully see when they were blinded by comfort or distraction. And now that you've stopped chasing, that version of you is back, and more powerful than ever. This return to your authentic self also resets your boundaries. You no longer tolerate inconsistency because your inner peace is more valuable than temporary attention. You stop waiting by the phone or checking if they've noticed your silence. You've outgrown that version of love, the one that required you to stay small just to keep someone close. Now your love starts with you. You pour into your own heart first, and from that fullness, you decide who gets access, not based on desire, but on alignment. The most beautiful thing is that you're no longer afraid of losing them, because you've found you. You're no longer looking back, wondering what else you could have done. You've done enough. You're not bitter. You're just better. You're grounded, healed, and evolving. Whether they come back or not is secondary now, because you've already come home, to your worth, to your wisdom, to your wholeness, and once you're there, you'll never chase again. You won't need to. The right people will meet you where you are, because you finally met yourself first. There's a quiet shift that happens when you stop chasing, an invisible turning point where the energy no longer flows outward but returns home to you. You begin to see clearly what you couldn't before, because the noise of fear and desperation begins to quiet. You're no longer reacting, overreaching, or trying to convince anyone of your worth, and in that stillness something truly beautiful is born, self-respect. You remember that your value doesn't come from being chosen, it comes from choosing yourself. When you stopped running toward someone, you started walking toward the life you actually deserve. You're no longer trying to force alignment with someone who isn't ready or willing to meet you where you are. And in doing so, you reset the dynamic. You give them space to feel your absence, to reflect on your presence, and to recognize what they once dismissed or overlooked. But more importantly, you give yourself space to breathe, to grow, to heal, and to come back into alignment with your own truth. The moment you stopped chasing was the moment you reclaimed your power, not the loud, aggressive kind of power, but the deep, unshakable kind that says, I know what I bring to the table, and I'm no longer afraid to eat alone. That's what they feel now, not your silence, but your strength. That absence they sense, it's the energetic boundary you've built out of self-love. It's the quiet confidence that doesn't need attention to feel validated, and whether they come back or not, that's no longer the question. You've changed the question entirely. It's no longer, will they miss me? It's, do I miss me when I'm with them? That's the deeper truth this journey revealed. You're not chasing anymore because you've realized that real connection is not one-sided. It doesn't require constant effort to hold together. It flows naturally, it shows up, and if someone can't see your value without you proving it, they were never meant to carry your heart. So today, as you stand in your new strength, remember this: you don't have to beg to be loved. You don't have to chase what's meant for you. You are worthy of being pursued, cherished, and chosen, without having to sacrifice your peace. The moment you let go of what's chasing you in circles, the right energy starts to chase you back. Not because you played a game, but because you remembered who you are. And once thank you so much for being here today. Your time, your presence, and your heart mean more than you know. If you've listened all the way through, it tells me one powerful thing: you're ready. Ready to stop chasing, to stop doubting, and to finally come home to your own worth. And that is not a small thing, that is everything. Please remember this: you are not too much, and you have never been not enough. You don't need to shrink, beg, or bend to be loved. You deserve to be met with effort, respect, and clarity, without having to chase it. You stepping into that truth is not weakness, it's strength, it's self-love. It's growth, and it's the beginning of the kind of love story that starts with you. So whether you're in a season of letting go, pulling back, or just learning how to love yourself again, honor that, trust that. You are on the right path. Keep showing up for you. Keep rising. Keep choosing peace over performance. The right people will recognize your value not when you're chasing them, but when you're walking fully in your own power. I appreciate you deeply for allowing me to be part of your journey. If this message touched your heart, hold it close and come back to it whenever you need the reminder. You are never alone. You are never without power. And your story is far from over, it's just getting started. Thank you. Take care of yourself, and goodbye for now. Keep shining.